shooting issues that, oh, thanks, Lindsay. I knew I would forget that. So thanks for that. And feel free to message me with any tech support issues you may need. This session is called Remembering Resilience, the Healing Power of Storytelling. In this session, we will share the story of our journey developing the podcast series, Remembering Resilience. The focus of this podcast is to highlight Native American resilience through and beyond trauma as we explore concepts, science, history, culture, stories, and practices that we are working with as we seek to shape a future for our children and for our grandchildren that is defined not by what we have suffered, but what we have overcome. This session highlights the power of storytelling and how it can be used to promote community engagement, a sense of feeling seen, heard, and understood while we continue on our journey to both individual and collective healing. And I think I'm turning it over to Lindsay to start us off. Thank you.
Miigwech. Thank you, Jenna. Welcome, everyone. I see there's many people still connecting to audio. We realized we kind of got excited a little bit about getting going. So I'll just give it just a few more minutes for folks to enter and join. You see familiar faces and names and new faces and names, and we're so appreciative for all of you to take this time to come together and to really just engage in conversation and learning together. So I was sharing with Jenna earlier that my computer time is 5 minutes ahead, and I didn't even do that on purpose. And so I do want to make sure that we're just honoring and giving people time to get in and get settled. The session's going to be super informal. So we encourage you to have your camera on, to unmute and talk with us when things are coming up for you, and all of those good things. So just want to welcome everybody again. I see David Knoyer has joined us. Welcome, David. It's been so long. Happy to have you here.
I came here to see what the real story is.
Well, you know, you've been a big part of it. So we welcome you to chime in whenever that makes sense for you too. All right. So technically we have 2 more minutes before official start time. So again, like I said, you're going to get a good feel for the way that we do things here, right? Susan and Bree, I'm just really wanting to be conversational, right? Be informal, be real, be authentic. And so I know that some of the other sessions tend to go over because they've all been so great today. So there's a lot of question and answers happening along the way. I want to remind people that all of the sessions today have been recorded, meaning that they will be available going forward to refer back to. I know it was such a hard thing for me to know that like I wasn't able to see everybody, because I think all the information brought forward today is so powerful and impactful. So, you know, down the road here, our plan is to make sure that we have everything up on the Gathering website, recordings of the other sessions as well. All right. So as my friend and colleague Jenna mentioned, as we're getting going here, she is available as tech support. We're hopeful that the issues will be minimal, but if anything is coming up along the way for you, she's here to support us through that process. I'm gonna go ahead and get my screen shared here. And make it officially a slideshow. Oh, look, we're on our last slide. Tech issues, right? All right. So I'm taking a look at timing. All right. So again, we officially welcome you to our last breakout session of the day. We will have a closing session also, and we really encourage you to come to that, because part of what this work is about is hearing our community voice in that process, and we will have an opportunity for everybody to share what they're taking away from our time together today as well. So as Jenna mentioned, the session you're in right now is Remembering Resilience, the Healing Power of Storytelling. I have my friends and colleagues, Susan and Brianna here, as well as David Knoyer, who helped immensely in season 1 and even was part of the brainchild or part of the brain working behind this podcast series in itself. So pleased to be here with all of you. And we told Jenna she didn't have to do our introductions, that we'd do our own. So as we're getting going here, I'll start us out. And I always love to bring our beautiful living Ojibwe language into the space. So Buju, Gawin, Apejin, Nipa, and Anishinaabe Mosi, Nenga, Gogwejitun, G, Anishinaabe Moyan. Nin Lindsay McMurran, Indigenous Cause, Kasagasquas Jamaica, Indunjaba, Idash Walker, and Da. So my name is Lindsay McMurran, citizen of the Leech Lake Nation, descendant of the White Earth Nation of Ojibwe, and I live in Walker, Minnesota, on the shores of beautiful Leech Lake. And I am currently the Director of Prevention Initiatives and Tribal Projects with Family Wise Services, home of Prevent Child Abuse Minnesota. We're so pleased to be here with you today. And with that, I'll pass it on over to Susan for her introduction.
Miigwech, Lindsay, Buju, Nagani Benesi, Queen Indigenous Cause, Megazin and Dodame, Mesquag, Mewizaga, Eganing, and Donjaba. My name is Susan Bolio. I'm a citizen of the Red Lake Nation. I currently reside in Brainerd, Minnesota. I work for the University of Minnesota Extension as an extension educator, and prior to that worked with MCCC and the Tribal Project, and got to work with Lindsay. So grateful I still get to work with Lindsay. And then do I just pass it to Brianna? Yeah, Miigwech.
Buju, Nawakamugu Kwe Indigenous Cause, Name Ndude, Ajamug and Dun Jaba. Hello, everyone. It's good to be in front of my relatives today and my sisters, Susan and Lindsay. Always a good time to be with them. I work for the University of Minnesota Extension. I am a tribal community facilitator. I'm also a member of the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe and also a descendant from St. Croix Band in Wisconsin. I know that I could probably go on with introducing myself, but just want to say miigwech to you all for being here. A lot of the work that we do comes from our passion in healing and the work we do, and really comes from a place of love. And so again, miigwech to you all for being here. And I'm going to shoot it back over to Susan to kind of lead us through some grounding exercises here. Miigwech.
Yeah, so I won't take too long, but we also have learned, especially over the last couple of years, how important it is just to ground and center ourselves. And so, so if you would just get yourself into a comfortable position, whatever that feels like for you, whatever that looks like for you. You can do this eyes opened or closed, but we're just going to do a brief check-in with ourselves. And so starting by just checking in with the breath. We're not trying to do anything special with the breath. We're just noticing, how is the body breathing itself in this moment? Seeing, where does the air go as your body breathes in? How deep does that breath go? How fast or slow is the breath? Are you breathing in and out of the nose or the mouth? Beginning by checking in with where we are in this moment.
Recording in progress.
And now that you have a good sense of what the breath is doing naturally in the body, let's begin to lengthen the inhale a little bit, taking that inhale a little bit deeper into the body, extending the exhale just a bit. With each breath, making the breath a little bit deeper and the exhale a little bit longer. And then just taking a minute or two at your own pace, just to scan down through the body, starting with the head, scanning all the way down to the feet. And if you notice tension or tightness in the body, different ways that the body is holding stress, you can invite in a little bit of ease with your breath, a little bit of relaxation to whatever parts of the body are needing it in this moment. Just tapping into the power of our breath to help calm and regulate the body, to bring in a sense of peace and ease. And then once you've scanned down through the body, bringing your attention for just a few more moments back to the breath. Noticing once again how the body is naturally breathing itself in this moment. Just observing, just noticing. And let's close with a grounding breath together. A nice big inhale in through the nose. A slow exhale out through the mouth. And then if you had your eyes closed, you can go ahead, opening your eyes, bringing yourself back fully into the space. All right. Lindsay, I apologize. I can't remember. I think I'm turning it over to Brianna now. Is that right, Bree?
Oh, excuse me. Thank you so much, Susan. I needed that as I'm sitting here yawning. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for grounding us in this space together. So we're going to jump into it. So thinking about, this breakout session, remembering resilience, the healing power of storytelling. And so one of the things that I think of when I see that title of the healing power of storytelling reminds me of a conversation that I just had a couple of days ago with some of you might know her, Cheryl Whitehawk. And Cheryl is coordinating, or she's up doing a training for us here in Hinckley. And she was talking about how powerful storytelling is, and how I was reminded of, as Indigenous people, in order for us to survive, we had to adapt and change. And so through many years, hundreds, thousands of years, our people have been adapting to change all along. And we do this because we have to survive, right? We have to survive all these years, you know, the seasons, right? The many changes, of course, the many, when colonization, you know, came over, like our people went through a huge change with where we lived and the different experiences that were coming our way, and we had to change. And so when I think about the healing power of storytelling, I think about what do we need to survive nowadays? What is it that will help our people to continue to move forward, right? And I think about how storytelling allows us to keep our language to survive. It allows us to keep our stories alive. It allows us to keep our traditions, our culture, our songs. It allows us to keep those things alive. But the one thing that we do know is that for a fact, like, we don't live the same way that we lived hundreds and thousands of years ago. We live completely different. And we as Indigenous people, we have to adapt and change in order for many things to survive. And so, you know, a lot of the stuff, you know, has been talked about, you know, a lot of things have been passed down through oral tradition. But the way that we live nowadays is completely different. So how do we have to change and shift and adapt in order for these things, in order for these things to survive? And we live in a world of technology. We live in a world of disconnection. We no longer live the way that we did hundreds and thousands of years ago. And so in order for these things to keep alive and in order for these things to survive, how do we need to shift and change? And so I think about these podcasts and how we are allowing for things to change and adapt because we no longer live the way that we lived for hundreds and thousands of years ago, right? And so we have to be mindful of that moving forward. And how do we keep these things alive? And we do it by conversation, right? And I know, like I love when we're in this space and we can have these conversations because we start to talk about some real hard things, right? We start to talk about the things that need to be talked about, right? We start to share the things that need to be shared. We start talking about the things that bring us healing and bring others healing. And this whole conversational podcast really allows us to do that. It allows for these things to survive. And so again, I just want to welcome you all to this breakout session. And with that, I think I'll end there, but I'll toss it over to Susan or Lindsay for any comments or thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Connecting the dots, right? That's what so much of this work is always about, is connecting the dots. Like our keynote speaker is this morning referred to. And I so appreciate that wisdom being shared here in this space. You know, I think a big part of our collective story and how this project came about is about, you know, thinking about traditional wisdom and knowledge, about community wisdom and input, and then about wanting to create something that future generations can learn from, can listen to, can feel connected to. And that really is kind of the origins, I think, of where we began and where we want to continue to go. Susan, any thoughts?
No, I mean, the only thing I'll say is, like, anybody who knows me knows I'm not a super techie person. So this, when it was first proposed by David that this be a podcast, I was both excited and terrified. But I think, and that's sort of the nature of anything new that we're doing, is like, it can be scary. We don't know a lot of these things. And so being willing to jump into it despite the fear that we might feel when we're doing something new like technology, but recognizing that like Brianna was talking about, how do we utilize what's available now to continue some of those really powerful ways of transmitting information and knowledge. And so it's been quite the journey, and I'm looking forward to discussing it today with both of you. So miigwech.
All right, so to give everybody a little bit more grounding and context and how we came about doing this work, I want to talk a little bit about the Tribal Neuroscience and Community Wisdom Project. As Susan mentioned, she was the first director of this work. She put this together, and it's been a model that actually our More Resilient Minnesota statewide collaborative project has adopted as well, in working through phases to really be able to build community capacity to understand what we mean when we say neuroscience. So oftentimes when we went out into community to do that adverse childhood experience presentation, the ACE interface presentation, people would just say, okay, we want to learn about ACEs. But the way that we approach this work brings so much more in, right? We talk about it as neuroscience because we're talking about the neurobiology of toxic stress, how that impacts our bodies and our brains, the very systems that we rely upon to tell us what's going on in the world. We talk about epigenetics, so that epigenetic inheritance that comes through from our ancestors that have come before us, and what we're passing along to our children and future generations. We talk about, of course, the adverse childhood experience study is really being that catalyst to bring all of this information together and to push it out to communities. So to really understand how important childhood is, how important it is to protect our little ones from adversity and trauma and stress as much as we possibly can. And then the R in neuroscience, of course, is resilience. So speaking about how is it that we as communities, as families, as individuals, as parenting adults or aunties or uncles or grandparents can really help cultivate these systems of support, these core protective systems that we know make such a difference regardless of our ACE score, regardless of the traumas and adversities we've gone through. And so you see on the screen here what we call our journey map for the latest iteration of this project. At our opening session this morning, we talked about the collaboration with the Center for Prevention at Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and how our Tribal Neuroscience and Community Wisdom Project is a recipient and a member of the Health Power cohort. So POWER is an acronym standing for People, Organizing, and Working for Equitable Results. And so when we started this project, actually back in 2015, Susan, 2016, I'm not going to put you on the spot. Dates are not my thing. Just know that we've been around for quite a while. What we always thought about was systems change work. How can we create change within our systems and our policies at the tribal level, as well as the state level, at organizational and agency level, so that anything that we're trying to implement is going to have that long lasting impact. It's going to be sustainable. It's not going to go away when the funding dollars go away. And that has really been the way that we've continued to think about this work. So you see on the screen, kind of our story of how the last year and a half has gone, 2 years now, almost, going through this iteration of the project. And what we realized, as many of you I'm sure can relate to as well, there's been a lot of adaptation over the last couple of years, taking into account what we call the dual pandemics, right? Because we're not only dealing with COVID and the impact there, we're also thinking about the civil unrest, the racial reckoning, the coming to terms with what many of us in our communities have known and seen for so long. But that is a new awakening for many people about the inequities that still remain in our country. So with all of that, we just wanted to share a little bit about this project. Community engagement work is at the core of it. However, what our plan was versus what ended up happening once the pandemic began looked really differently. As I mentioned before, Susan was the original director of this work. And what I loved so much as I was brought in further down the road was going into communities. Susan with her big crock pot full of food and her trunk full of all kinds of supplies, including those little containers so people could bring home leftovers, right? That is where the origin of the Tribal Project came from. And so imagine our conundrum we were faced with when we realized that in-person engagement was not a safe way to engage community, right? I think a big push within our tribal communities as well as elsewhere has been taking care of community during this, taking care of our elders, our young ones, our vulnerable community members. And so being in person, unfortunately, was not an option. So we were left to regroup, replan. And what came out of this was we already had the first season done of the podcast Remembering Resilience. And we thought, you know what a great way to continue to engage community, to continue to push education and information out there through the use of podcasts. And so I wonder if Susan might want to speak a little bit to the origin and before season one. I know you alluded to it a little bit, Susan, but if you want to talk about our connection in White Earth, David's ideas and where that all came from.
Yeah, sure. White Earth was one of the first communities that we worked in. And when we were setting up our presentations, one of the women, I had gone through the Blend In Leadership program with Lindsay and I actually had together. And her name is Maggie Rozo. She runs the radio station over in White Earth. And so I was like, hey, Maggie, you should come check out, this presentation we're going to be doing. And so she came, and when she, after we got done, she came up afterwards and she was like, we need to get this on the radio. We need to get this out there so more people can hear this. I was like, that's a great idea. Let's do it. And so we had numerous conversations and we brought David into the conversations, and some things had happened that made it not possible at the time to do it as a radio show. And so we had a bunch of content, and David was like, hey, well, let's just do podcasts then. So we were like, okay, well, let's do podcasts. So really this came out of one of our very first communities saying, this information, how can we get this out to more people? And so I don't know if there's more than that you wanted me to say on that, Lindsay, but that's sort of the essence of how it started. And thank you to David for pushing us to move into the realm of podcasts, as opposed to just sort of being stuck in thinking, okay, well, if we can't do a radio show, we'll just, I don't know what we're going to do with this content. But and then we tried to set up a lot of the pieces in the podcast so that those pieces could be taken by radio stations and used at some of our tribal radio stations and stuff if they wanted to be able to sort of put that in a spot on their show, weekly show or something like that. But yeah, I'll stop. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. So again, it's all about adaptation, right? And I'm sure many people can relate to that as well. And so some of you may be familiar and may have heard our podcasts before. Some of you might have not had the opportunity to listen yet. And so just in releasing season 2, we were able to get our heads around this podcast world a little bit better. And we were able to upload our podcasts to all major podcast platforms. So whether you use Spotify, or you have to look on the screen to even see which ones there are, Audible, or whatever Apple's version of it is, we're on all major podcast platforms. We do have that QR code right there that will lead you to our Remembering Resilience website, where all the podcasts can be accessed as well. And I also just want to mention, if you just go to Google and put in Remembering Resilience podcasts, that'll get you there also. And so again, I just love how even just the origin of our Remembering Resilience podcast series really came out of being responsive to community need. And I love how Brianna started us out today in really talking about how oral tradition, storytelling, it is a very community-based, traditional-based way of relaying information and relating to one another and learning from one another. So you've heard us talk a whole bunch already. I'm tired of hearing my own voice. So here's what I want to ask in the remainder of this session. We really want this to be conversational. We want to hear your questions, your thoughts, what you wonder about this work. And I really do want to return back to that framing of how we feel like this work is systems change work, right? We're shifting culture, shifting the way we think about community engagement. So in addition to pushing out these podcasts in both season 1 and season 2, we've also hosted some online virtual podcast community conversations in which we would come together with a group that was interested. We asked them to listen to the podcast ahead of time. Even if they didn't, they were welcome to join and engage in conversation. But we really just wanted an opportunity here to hear from our community, to be able to share with our community the work that we do. And what I want to foreshadow is that later on this summer, we're so excited to be releasing podcast conversation guides. And so our idea behind that is that if you have an interested group in your community, if your organization wants to engage, we have guides that will be prepared for you, both participant discussion guides, as well as facilitation guides, in which you could host your own podcast community conversations in your community with the people that you feel might be interested. And so that release date will be later on this summer. We ask that you stay engaged with the project to find out updates. We are on Facebook and Instagram. We also have that website. And we really just want to be able to keep growing this network of tribal community members, as well as helping professionals that work within or with tribal nations to be able to continue to spread the learning, the knowledge around this. So season 1, we really focused on unpacking what neuroscience is. We have episodes about the brain science of toxic stress, about historical trauma, about adverse childhood experiences, how that connects back to the other topics we're talking about, as well as what our communities are doing proactively to create and to cultivate that self-healing communities idea, right? We believe in community. We believe that the people that are most impacted need to have the voice, need to direct the charge, so to speak, about where we're going next with this work. So our first 4 episodes of season 1 really talk about that. We are so pleased that we brought in some amazing leadership from our tribal communities, Janice Bad Moccasin and Linda Eagle Speaker in episodes 5 and 6 of season 1 to share their stories, right? We kind of titled it Voices of Resilience, to really let us know, what does this look like in community? How is it that these elders, these individuals have really lived these experiences and really walked the talk, so to speak, about how we support each other, about our traditional knowledge and ways of being with one another. So we encourage you to check that out. Season 2 took a different turn. And Susan or Bree, do you want to speak a little bit about season 2 for us?
Yeah, I can talk about it, and then Brianna, feel free to fill anything in. So in season 2, we wanted to really focus more on the healing piece and different ways of healing, different modalities, different experiences. And so Brianna and I had been having some conversations, and then also had some really powerful experiences with healing with ayahuasca. And so we invited Dr. Joe Tafur to come on and to share, to talk about his experience working with the Shipibo people down in Peru, but also as a Colombian American doctor, working with individuals on the Dene, with the Dene Nation and some of the work that they've been doing. And so we sort of started with that. And so the first 3 episodes are parts of our conversation with Dr. Tafur. And then the last 3 episodes, when in the neurosciences and the ACE interface, when we talk about resilience, there's sort of these 3 core protective systems. For those of you who haven't heard the presentations, I'm sure most of you have, but thinking about those 3 core protective systems, so the individual, the relational, the community, family, and then the community, culture, and spirituality. And so we just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about and sharing about those different aspects of resiliency as we've experienced it in our lives, stories that we've heard of loved ones and community members and such. And so just really highlighting those core protective systems and different ways to tap into that. So feel free to hop in.
Yeah, definitely some different way, just thinking about different ways of healing, you know, and for those of you that work within Indigenous communities, know that there are just multiple layers of trauma and grief and loss. And in my experience in the work that I do, I see that firsthand, not only in my own experience, but then going out to communities and then hearing some of the traumas and experiences that people hold, and they hold it inside their bodies, right? So for those who have listened to season 2, you know, just I would encourage that we all keep an open mind with it, because some of these different ways of healing, you know, are a little bit different, right? Healing through plant medicines and whatnot. But I can tell you that my experience, and then also, you know, with Susan's and also Dawn, who is also featured on season 2 podcast, when we start to think about, you know, those traumas and those layers, you know, what we have been essentially able to do is peel away at those layers, right? And really try to get at the root causes of some of the things that we deal with, you know, within our life. And so, gosh, so I'm kind of like the third wheel that like entered this podcast world. Susan and Lindsay are like professionals, and David, oh my gosh, you're beyond professional. Like season 1 was definitely like my favorite, right? Listening to you all, such a huge eye-opener. But so it was difficult to go back and listen to season 2, but for those that have, you know, it's my hope that you can hear those and really feel hope for the future, because I do believe that some of these different ways of healing, specifically with plant medicine and some of these other medicines, like I really do feel passionate about that in hopes that this can really be a doorway, be a tool to help our Indigenous communities propel us into healing, shedding those layers and really truly getting at the root cause, right? So I can talk a ton about that, but I'll toss it back over to Lindsay and yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to stop sharing the screen, because what I really want to invite people to do at this point, if you're comfortable, turn your camera on. We'd love to see your faces. And we want to bring all of your voices into the conversation at this point. Leaving it really open-ended, I guess, for us as panelists, we just wonder, you know, what are you thinking? What are you noticing? What do you wonder about our journey? We really want to make sure that this information resonates and that you get useful tidbits out of the session. So I would just welcome you to either post questions in the chat, to unmute, and just share what your thoughts are about what we've shared so far.
So I just want to say what I'm hearing from all of you is this willingness to lean into discomfort in service of a larger purpose, which is what we all do, right? So I applaud you for that. And it's something we all need to do, is lean into our discomfort, because we know we have to step into a bigger role. So thank you.
Miigwech, Suzanne, I am excited, by the way, to listen to your session from the morning. Other plug to everybody to remember that all the sessions today have been recorded, so we can continue to learn from each other. And those can be found on our conference website. Give us a couple days, but they'll be there soon. I want to respond to that because one thing I want to share is our journey in season 2 was a tough one, right? So thankful for David Knoyer's knowledge in season 1, you know, and getting us going. Season 2, we felt the strain, right? The grown zone a little bit of, you know, being in this world of making podcasts and not knowing exactly what we were doing. And so I want to share my personal journey with that was Susan and Brianna really headed up those first 3 episodes of season 2. And then it was kind of on my plate to figure out where we were going next. And for the last 3 episodes of season 2, I hit a writer's block. I had such a hard time in figuring out how is it that we're going to go forward. And so, you know, this was in the middle of the pandemic. I've always worked remotely, and yet I really depended upon those opportunities for community engagement, whether it was getting out in community to do presentations and trainings, getting out in community to table about the project, getting out in the community to share a meal, right, with people that are engaged in our work. And all of a sudden I found myself so isolated that I was having a really hard time, both with mental health, as well as just thinking of positive coping mechanisms. And so what I finally realized I needed to do was to reach out to Susan and Brianna and to share my struggles. And that's really where those last 3 episodes of season 2 came out of. And you'll hear some really raw, vulnerable, authentic stories and conversation from all 3 of us. You know, I think oftentimes people think, oh, you're a professional in this work, right? That must mean you have your life together, or you have it all figured out. And no, we're human too. And we struggle also. So I just want to put that out there. And I see a hand up from Teresa. So please feel free to ask your question.
Oh, Ani bonjour. Msquadesi wawasagan kwe indishnakas migizi dodem. Neashingaming in Dunjaba. Currently, I'm in Mille Lacs, working for the Family Healing Wellness Court. I'm going to admit, and I'm embarrassed by this, I did not know about these podcasts, so I'm very excited to actually take the time to listen to them. So if my comment is out of line or not in line with what you're doing, please forgive me. But one of the things I've learned from Susan and Brianna is we've really talked a lot about resilience and trauma, our historical trauma, and how we move through that. One of the things I'd like to see continued or even more work around is how do we love ourselves, not just the self-care, but how do we tap into the generosity to ourselves, to those around us, and more importantly, those of us who've been through trauma and really struggle with trusting relationships. How do we accept generosity and love from others without thinking there's an ulterior goal or agenda attached to it? So as you're doing your wonderful work that you do, I'd love to see you do some work around that. Miigwech.
Yeah, miigwech, Teresa. Good to see you, by the way. Hugs and loves to you. Gosh, I mean, I could say a ton about that, just because I feel like I would say for the last couple of years, I have been in that mode of like trying to figure out what love is, right? And I'm gonna be honest with this group. I'm gonna be vulnerable with you all because I'm gonna be sharing just some pieces of my story. That just to touch on it, Teresa. But the last couple of years, I've been really trying to understand like what is love, and more specifically, have I ever experienced love? To back it up even a little bit more, I recently went through a divorce and went through that whole process and really trying to understand what this next chapter of my life. How I want that to look, right? And so at the very beginning of all of that, that whole process was really trying to understand how to take care of myself, because I spent so much time and effort putting all of my energy into someone else that obviously wasn't working, right? And so with toying with this notion, and even with Susan and Lindsay, like we've had multiple conversations about, you know, our own personal struggles and whatnot. And it was interesting because I think that when you start to ask those questions, matter of fact, I know for a fact, like when you start to ask those questions and you throw it out to the universe, right? And when you really truly want to know, like those answers are going to start coming at you. When you are ready, when you are truly ready and able to listen to them, they're going to come in. And so it was interesting. And I just share this really quickly and then we can go on. But it's probably been about 2 months now. And it was really odd. It was right before the full moon. And for those of you who are on Facebook with me know that I always post stuff about the moon and, you know, different things happen and the energies are you know, high intense and whatnot. And it was right before the moon. And I was sleeping and it was like in the middle of the night and I woke up out of nowhere. And all of a sudden this voice came into me and it says, right? Maybe it's not about self-love. Maybe it's about self-compassion. And for me, I had to figure out, well, what the heck does this mean for me? And so it has been a process of really trying to understand that whole piece about not only self-care, but self-love, self-compassion. You know, it's like I've been on this healing journey for those of you who have been on your healing journey for a few years. Some of you may have those thoughts in your mind that's, God dang it, when am I going to be done healing? When am I going to get to the point where I don't have to worry about any of this stuff, right? And we all know that it never ends, right? So I can tell you, Teresa, that I can say a lot about this. And, I know Susan and Lindsay, like this is a difficult thing because in order to have self-love, we have to have self-compassion and we have to believe it. And some of us may never, ever get to a point of really, truly believing it. Anyways, for those of you that know me, I could go down a rabbit hole with that, but I will just end there and just know that I too definitely struggle with it. So yeah, miigwech.
Miigwech, Brianna. And yeah, what a wonderful question, Teresa. And I think it is a good thing for us to explore in this next season because that part, when I hear you ask that question, it really brings me to understanding pieces of my own journey of that a lot of times when we've experienced a lot of trauma, we're so used to caretaking others and shutting down to our own, like, what do we want? What do we need? What's going on for us? Because what we often learn is when others are happy, we're safe. So we put our energies externally to make sure those around us feel good and feel happy because then we're safe, right? Or we might experience where, somebody gives us something, but there's a catch to it. And so those are the wirings that get, those are the things that get wired in for us. And so I think unpacking those pieces are so important for me in my own journey. It's very much been about asking the question, what do I want? What do I need? And I can tell you when I first started asking that question, most of the time I was like, I don't know. I have no idea. I've been so disconnected from that for so long. I don't know. So it's that constant, like that's where practices like the body scans have been helpful, like checking in with the body. What's going on? Checking in with my emotions. Like, what do I need in this moment? And beginning to learn how to caretake ourselves in those moments. Like when I need something physically or emotionally or mentally, what are those practices I can do that help me to be able to feel that myself? And it's not about independence, like, oh, I don't need anybody, I can do it myself. But it is that piece around, like, as long as I'm always, like putting it out there for someone else to hopefully read my mind and what I need or what I want, man, I'm going to constantly be disappointed. And so checking in, what do I want? What do I need? Is this something I can tend to for myself? Is this something I need to reach out to someone else to help me with? Right. But that but I've just found like starting there is so important, because for so many of us that grew up with a lot of trauma, we are so disconnected from ourselves and what we want and need, that question of like, how do I show myself self-love or self-compassion, like that, it's such a foreign concept.
There was a question that popped up in the chat. Do you have any further advice on how to encourage others to lean into their discomfort?
I can add something super quick, and then I'm sure Lindsay and Brianna can add to it as well. But what I've begun to really tell myself is to remind myself, when I'm feeling fear and when I'm feeling discomfort, that's because I'm in something new. Like if it's a fear of doing something, like that, just anytime it's something new, because of the way that our brains naturally wire, we're going to feel discomfort in that. And so if I want something other than what I've been getting, I have to be willing to step into that discomfort, that on the other side of that, there is something, there is something new, and, and it helps that I mean, I love to learn. So that helps. It's like, oh, what's on the other side? But it used to be like, oh man, like, can I just be comfortable? And the reality is that there's a balance, of like discomfort and comfort. Like we need, like both are important, but if we're constantly where we're comfortable, it's because it's what we know. And if what we're trying to do is to create new patterns and pathways, new ways of showing up in this world for ourselves and for others, we have to be willing to step into the discomfort of whatever the situation that we're uncomfortable in is trying to show us. And so, I think that remembering and recognizing that is a piece of the growth journey, is leaning into the discomfort. That discomfort is not the same thing as this is not good, this is bad, right? And that's something that I've had to try to work through too as well, because, like what's intuition and what's just discomfort. What, when my intuition says, nope, this isn't a good thing, versus like my discomfort of like, oh, don't do that, right? And anytime there's like this really big fear response to it, that's probably more about discomfort than it is about my intuition. When my intuition comes through, it's just a like, nope, or be careful, or whatever it is, right? There's not a lot of emotion attached to it. It's mostly just like, here it is, yes or no, don't do this, whatever it is. But if there's a lot of discomfort attached to it, that's my learning edge. That's an area of growth.
Oh, go ahead, Lindsay.
No, I just want to add too, I think so often, especially in our like mainstream society, Minnesota nice mindset, we have conflated and confused the ideas of feeling uncomfortable and feeling unsafe, right? And I think that is why when oftentimes you or meet somebody in an elevator or in the hallway, you talk about the weather, you talk about sports, and even if somebody asks you, how are you doing? The expected answer is fine, thanks, how about you, right? And to not be able to have that time and space to really answer that question, and bring our full selves forward. As a presenter doing work about historical trauma, that has been, I found myself in some of the most raw, vulnerable positions, right? And what I do, because I'll be talking about something and it'll bring up emotion in me, and that's okay. And I stop doing what I'm doing in that presentation and I acknowledge it, right? Being vulnerable, being authentic. I think that also helps the audience connect in a different way, to really understand we aren't talking just about what happened, 400, 500 years ago to our people. We're talking about what's still happening today, what's still impacting us, what I feel in every bone of my body when I start to talk about some of that work. And not that it should be performative, not that it should always be on our shoulders to help educate people around that. But at the same time, early on when I was doing this work, I felt it like just drop into my spirit that part of going out into community and talking about this, that is my healing work too. That's what I need to heal the wounds that I still carry and that my ancestors have felt. So that maybe my boys will feel a little bit less of that pain when they grow up and begin to find their own pathways too.
I'll just add really quickly that I think one of the things that I had to do early on in my healing journey is to surrender to it, and to know that it's going to be uncomfortable, but that there has been nothing that has taken me down where I haven't been able to get up and out of. But I think surrendering to the process for me has allowed me to accept that, you know what, there's going to be many moments of your life, Bree, that you're going to be faced with challenges, right? And that, you know, just like kind of how I was saying before, like, you know, it's like all these layers, you know, all these multiple layers, you know, start to shed, you know, and just when you think you've got this layer, well, then it folds back over. And then now you have to readdress that wound or whatever it is, trauma experience, however you want to say it. But for me, it's like surrendering to it. It's like, okay, it's may not be easy, but being on a healing journey isn't always hard either. There are some very, very many moments of good feelings. It's not always negative. There have been a lot of positive moments. And when I can surrender to this process, then it's like, okay, Bree, it's like, here you go. You knew that it wasn't going to be easy, but you made a commitment to yourself. And I will ask myself a lot, you know, like through the past couple of years, I will ask myself, do you want to be where you were before this? And the honest answer is no. So lean into the suck a little bit, get past this, because you know that these feelings that are inside your body, inside your mind, body and spirit, right? Nothing stays the same. Everything is constantly changing. You know, when things are going good, you know, be mindful, because it's not going to stay the same. When things are going bad, be mindful, because that's not going to stay the same either. And so it's just this up and down. And if we can surrender to that process and knowing that, you know what, there's going to be times when we're low, and then there's going to be times where we come up, you know, and it's this ebb and flow. So miigwech for that.
Yeah, I see another question in the chat talking about maybe some more examples of healing and of how storytelling can help in that process.
I think one of the things that I'd like to just that I'd like to share is, you know, when we started, it's probably especially season 2, there was this like, well, what do we have to share? Like, what, you know, who am I to, you know, and the reality is that we all have lived experiences and things that that can help others on their journey as well. And we might not know who needs to hear it, but I think when we, you know, so that again, going back to that piece around like fear or it stepping into the discomfort is like, it's been really uncomfortable to be in a place where like, there's a microphone and there's a thing recording you and, you know, and like, you know, this is going to go live, you know, this is going to be out in the, wherever, you know, like that, like I had a lot of anxiety about that. Right. And again, that piece of like, well, who am I to share whatever? But again, I think what I've learned in that process is like, we've gotten really powerful feedback from people of how helpful these podcasts have been. And so just knowing that we all have something to share that can contribute in really powerful and good ways to the healing across our families and communities. And so don't be afraid to use your voice in whatever format it is. It might not be a podcast. It might be a podcast. If it is, like Lindsay and Brianna and I are happy to have a conversation of what we wished we'd known before we got started, right? But definitely step into that discomfort too, because you don't know who is going to be changed or helped by the story that you share.
And we had another really great question. How can we use storytelling to not only acknowledge the traumatic, but celebrate and norm the wisdom and healing ways of our ancestors so that the dominant narrative is one of possibility.
I think often about, again, when I was first starting out this work in mainstream society, right? When I first became an ACE interface presenter, when I began to lean into talking more about how our Indigenous communities are impacted by historical trauma, I had to shake out of my head that dominant narrative that says, you're a professional, you compartmentalize, you shouldn't show emotion, you shouldn't, get choked up about things. And then luckily that voice was overridden by realizing we have to show the humanity in it. We have to show our real selves. We have to show how we're impacted. Oftentimes when I do talk about historical trauma to particularly groups of people who are mandated to be there, I have people sitting in the back row with their arms crossed, rolling their eyes at me the whole time. And I've learned to deal with that too, because what I realize is that those are unhealed wounds also, right? Those are folks who aren't willing to step back and look at why is it that they put up walls when we begin to think about our shared histories, right? Those of us who identify as Indigenous, we're not the only ones that have been impacted by the way this country was formed. We're not the only ones that have been impacted by the years of policies and legislation, and organizational mindsets that continue to discriminate and to perpetuate inequities within our society. There's harm being done on all sides. And so it's also that opportunity for me, I think, to kind of reframe it a little bit for myself. And instead of being offended, instead of being hurt, I've been in a historical trauma presentation before where an older white man stood up and basically told me everything I was saying. There was no truth to it because he knew a Native person who was successful despite historical trauma and that they weren't impacted. So why is it that everyone else isn't getting on board with that? And to feel that and to be in a room full of people and where someone feels so emboldened to do that spoke to me a lot about how he saw me, right? And I think this connects back to murdered and missing Indigenous women and relatives, right? Our lives aren't equally valued by others within this society. We're changing that narrative, right? I want this to be a message of hope because it really is. And we know, again, that I think that all speaks to the wounds of people that are showing up in different ways.
I'll just share really quickly. So when I think about when I tell stories, storytelling, right? What do I need in order to be able to do that and to share openly, honestly, and authentically? And the truth is we need to have safe places out there. And we kind of talk about that in season 2 with Dr. Tefer. But we need to have safe places out there. What do we need in order for that to happen? Well, we need trust. We need honest. We need connection. We need to build relationships in order to be vulnerable enough to share the things that we need to share to resonate with people, to share our stories. So we need safe places out there. So when I think about storytelling, that's what do I need in order to share my stories? Well, I need a safe place. I need a safe place where I'm able to share. So, miigwech.
And I'll just add super quickly, because I know we're almost at time, Suzanne, but as I've been learning a lot more about healing and resilience, the irony is that so much of it points back to traditional Indigenous wisdom, right? And so that's something that I often share and I talk about because it is about reconnecting to that. And there is hope in that. There is power in that reclaiming and remembering those parts of ourselves and those practices that help to keep us healthy and thriving individually and collectively.
Yeah, miigwech. I thank you all for creating that space here for us as we continue to lean into these conversations. We encourage you to do a number of things. First and foremost being, please listen to the podcast if you haven't already. Share your thoughts and ideas We also, there's a link at the bottom of the podcast page for evaluation. We really need your voice, right? Our funders appreciate knowing that it's impacting community. We do as well, knowing how this might be resonating with you. And then lastly, know that there's more to come. We're open to more ideas about where you want us to take the podcast next, how we can continue expanding on those tools and healing modalities and sharing them with all of you. Miigwech, I'll turn it over to Jenna maybe for some last words.
Yeah, just a couple last things. Thanks again for joining us today. The final session of the day will be our closing ceremony, our closing session. And I put the links to the chat, in the chat for those sessions and our general event webpage as well. And we really encourage you to join our closing session. We'll have some policymakers there that we're going to hear from. And that's where you can be for our drawing, I believe, or that's where you get the link for that. So definitely want to check that out. And yes, once again, check those podcasts out. Feel free to share, and we will see you at our closing ceremony. Thank you all again for being here. Special thanks to Brianna, Susan, and Lindsay. Thank you.
Miigwech, everyone.
Miigwech. Thank you all.
Gigawabamin Menoa.